Majestix had a super qualifier.
Yep.
It was won by Kyle Rayner and Nick Nighthawk team.
Yes.
Do we really have to explain that team?
Yeah.
But another team got second.
Yes.
A very interesting team.
Very interesting.
It takes a little bit of both of us to discuss this team.
A little bit. There are some pretty important rules that come with this team.
Going into this, I don't want to take away from Kelby, who did win this tournament. There is some issues with it, and we don't want to get into that conversation.
No.
So, that said, we're going to discuss Pierre McDermott's second place Majestix team, which I've lovingly referred to as the John Cena. You've got to watch wrestling at least once for our fans. We have a lot of fans in the South that watch wrestling, Amber.
I read comics. Don't expect me to watch wrestling.
Comic fans read what? No. So this team consists of a few cool figures. One of which I'm really jealous that Pierre beat me to using in competition, and that is the Con Loki, 115 points, M027. He's got some really cool stuff that we're going to go over a little later. He was armed with the Butcher. Butcher is a stat machine. We're going to get into that later. And Loki is very hard to see and very, very well endowed in stats. Stats, Amber. Don't look there. Next up on the team,
Iron Man. This is number 38, 110 points. This is a stealth suit Iron Man. It's actually Rhodey. So this actually has a bunch of funky powers with it that we'll go into for my daily part of this. My doobly-doos. But yeah, this style's really loose. And he was possessed by Blackhand, who is really good for range possession because of his powers.
Yeah, he adds a lot to a character whose range who might need a little bit of a boost at range. As well, this team had a resource, and it was the orange power battery. Do I have to? This is just good. It's mine! It's one of my favorites.
Yep.
It's really cool. Shall we?
So there is a big central ruling that this entire team is based off of. I'm not going to get too into the entities and the power batteries. By now, we pretty much all know how those work. What I do want to talk about is that both of these characters have traits that deal with line of fire. Now, Loki's is listed that lines of fire can't be drawn to Loki by opposing characters 150 points or less if Loki has one or fewer action tokens, unless that character has the Asgardian, deity, or mystical keywords. Now, it takes down a lot of people that are going to be drawing lines of fire to him. They have to be 150 points or more, they have to be more than 150 points. And unless he's got, if he's got one or fewer action tokens, easy enough to keep him on. He's not indomitable, so you're not really likely to be pushing him anyways. And then, unless they have one of the three specific keywords. Now, the Iron Man one is when it's not your turn, lines of fire can't be drawn to Iron Man if he occupies hindering terrain or is adjacent to blocking terrain. The big things about this is that lines of fire can't be drawn. It is the same ruling that is made for the Indigo battery, and that is, it stops a lot of powers before they can even go off. The big one is Pulse Wave. Now, I've already done a huge dial-up episode about how to break down Pulse Wave, but the start of Pulse Wave is that you have to be able to draw a line of fire before you can ignore. With characters like this who stop that line of fire from being drawn, there's nothing to ignore. You can't even get as far as drawing a line of fire. Now, Pierre was actually mentioning that this was a rule that he had to remind his opponents constantly throughout the games because not only is it a pulse wave stopper, it's just an everything stopper. There's no prob, there's no perplexed, a ranged combat. You just can't see these characters unless you meet their specific requirements. Now Loki's, I kind of went over, and that's pretty cut and dry. The one thing I do want to mention with Iron Man's is that it's unless he's occupying, hindering, or adjacent to blocking. Now blocking, as I've mentioned in my map terrain episode, can be squares of blocking, which are the brown outlines of the map. It could be a barrier, or it could be a wall. All of that is considered blocking terrain. On the hindering terrain thing, as long as he's occupying that hindering terrain, this is going to go off. So even if your character ignores hindering terrain for line of fire, you can still ignore that the hindering terrain is there, but he's still considered occupying that hindering terrain. That part you can ignore. So he's still going to go off on that. You're still not going to be able to draw a line of fire, even if you're ignoring the hindering that he's sitting in, because he's still sitting in it. There's not too much else around that. This was the big proponent of the game. Jason will go into the strategy as to why this ruling was so specific and so good for this team. The only other thing I want to touch on with the orange battery is that it did recently get a tiny errata, and it's not even errata to the orange battery, it's an errata to how it interacts with maps, in that it can't take away any improved movement that is being granted by maps. Now, I am saying that even though this is the Rock and it's not into the new season where we're allowing orange rules to actually exist within the Rock, but it is still worth mentioning for anybody that's looking at the orange battery, is that on maps like the surface of the moon or space, the orange battery will not take away the movement granted by maps. Alright, so one final thing about the Iron Man is his other trait, and that's the summoning ancestral spirit. When Iron Man would be KO'd, roll 2d6 that can't be re-rolled. If the result on either die is a 5 or a 6, you may replace this character with a character from all of the chases. On its starting line, if you do, deal that character 1 unavoidable damage equal to 6 minus the result of the other die. Only one friendly character per game may be replaced through this ability. The key wording on this is would be KO'd. Once again, another episode that I've done on Dial It Up is the difference between actually KOing a character and when it would be KO'd. When a character would be KO'd, it's never considered to be KO'd in that instance. So the character that it's replacing with, I just recently did an episode on replacing characters. All of those game effects are going to go on to that new character. That's still technically considered the same character. No points are scored. No relics or resources are going to be removed from that character. It's only getting to the point where they're clicking as far as you're about to get to a KO click, and no, I'm not dead, I'm going to do this other thing. So when he gets to that point, he'll be able to bring out whatever was on his sideline. In this case, we're looking at the Iron Slayer. It's the only one we have. Which, is just the one that I have here to show you. So, and then from there, so as long as one of those die were a 5 or a 6, then you're going to be dealing him some damage based on what the other result of the 2d6 were.
I'm trying to figure out what the copyright limitations on the John Cena theme are for playing the John Cena theme. What the copyright limitations on music are, period, and how much I can play that theme for this team. Anyway, so as Amber explained in the rules, this is a very hard team to draw lines of fire to. Loki with his trait, limiting characters who are 150 or more than 150 points, or deities, or mystical characters. And Iron Man, who, as long as he's occupying hindering, which generally comes with maps, or next to blocking, which is destroyable in a lot of cases, so there is that option. This guy is not going to be seen either. Now, Loki is most likely to be victimized as far as that power is concerned, but we have a friend, and that is the Butcher. Now, the Butcher doesn't start off with the meatiest of defense powers. He starts with toughness. Little bit of a shame. He does have a special damage power, which once per turn a friendly character may reroll Blade's Claws. That's not going to do much on the first click, but all of his stats, with the exception of defense, are the same as Loki's, are higher than Loki's. So Loki does have a lot of options, with the exception of range. Butcher doesn't have a range. So as we move down the dial, if Loki happens to take some damage, you get some later dial defensive powers, specifically when you're on the regen power with Loki, where you can regen and use prob. You have invulnerable, which is a good defensive measure. And I believe that also comes with quintessence. So if Loki is taking damage, you're already in a bad situation anyway, and likely you're across the board from our friend Kyle. Kyle Rayner. Loki is kind of kryptonited by him. Now, that's not to say Loki's 100% to be taken by him. One thing to remember is Loki's hard to see. Loki is also traded with shape change and sidestep. Now, sidestep is a wonderful power to get to where you're going when you need to get there. Especially if you don't want to do it with if you want to do it with a minimum number of actions. And Loki is very able to slow roll the game. Or slow roll his way up. He also comes with probability control, and he comes with super senses, and he has some mind control if your opponent's team just happens to be better than yours. He ignores elevated terrain and hindering from movement, which gives him some really big mobility. He's got some late dial blades, claws, and fangs, which are less important. Loki's more about trying to keep on the top. Next, his buddy Iron Man, about the same in range. It comes with sidestep as well, also invulnerable. He's got a damage power that gives him shape change as well. But if he rolls a 1, he can't use the shape change again this game, but can use willpower instead. So as long as he's got that power, if he's failed the shape change, he can say he gets willpower, which he doesn't start with, as it would appear. But his friend is the Black Hand. Black Hand adds to the offensive capabilities of this character, because this character does start with Energy Explosion, and Black Hand starts with Psychic Blast. Those two powers are besties. Energy Explosion can combine with Psychic Blast to make a really big penetrating bubble of hurt. And that is a lot of the offense that exists in this team. This team functions on a very defensive level. You got an orange battery to shut down your opponent's powers that may offensively be getting to you, especially if you can stop them by giving your characters the power with the entity and then canceling it with the orange battery. As well, the orange battery is very easy to move and control into those late games once you get to the master constructs. So now that we've gotten over the part that the characters are very hard to see, let's talk about how hard to kill and just touch these characters are. If you get to the Loki, he's still got shape change and super senses. So you're gonna need precision strike and battle fury to get around those, which doesn't really make itself plentiful on the same character unless you're running Guy Gardner from the OP kit of War Light. The Iron Man, again, shape change as well, comes with invulnerable, so he's a little bit meatier. Black Hand gives him all kinds of healing abilities if you can start KOing your opponent's characters as well. Can also torture your opponent's characters for missing you. And once you get to getting close to killing Iron Man, there's a chance that he becomes one of these ancestral chase Iron Men, which is obnoxious, as I'm sure you can imagine, because there's an answer for just about every team in that collection of characters. If you happen to have a generic theme team, there's a generic theme character in this Iron Man collection that will be a problem for you. All of them have armor, so if he just wants to do something offensive, he can choose any of them, because they get +1 attack, +1 damage against characters that share a keyword with them. They have armor, so if you have armor, they're going to get +1 attack, +1 damage. If you have a mystical team or a lot of mystical characters, expect to see the Iron Pharaoh come out. He won't bring his Falcon with him, that's all right, but he's got a 9 range, right? A +1 attack, +1 damage, you've got a lot coming at you. So killing Iron Man, you gotta hope that he doesn't make that ancestral roll, because that could end up being a bit of a nightmare for you. Orange battery, like I said, in itself is really great. This team comes with a lot of improved movement. Doesn't come with improved targeting, but I believe you can form a spotlight and start canceling opposing spotlights. Now, one of the big things this team cancels is the man with the eyeballs in his hands, and that's right, that's Nick Fury. Nick Fury is a big target that this team managed to nullify, because we all know Nick Fury is very plentiful in the metagame right now. He exists, he's there, he's something we all have to deal with. He's able to say you can't use a power, which is insane, but he does still require drawing line of fire. Loki is safe because Nick Fury costs 120 points. That is less than 150, so Loki will be able to stare Nick Fury in the eye. Yeah, I said in the eye. And, Nick Fury at his 9 range isn't going to do anything to Loki. As well, he won't be able to see the Iron Man, regardless of the fact that he can ignore the terrain on the way there, because as long as Iron Man is occupying it, you just can't draw the line of fire, period, right? It's not about what you can see in that case, it's what he's doing. So Nick Fury becomes a problem for this team. So how do you deal with this team? You shake hands. You go up, you hug them. Orange battery teams with plasticity are a nightmare for this team, but of course this team having an orange battery does get its own plasticity, so they're still breaking away on 4, 5s, and 6s. They don't ignore characters necessarily, which is a shame. A couple things also to be aware of is the Iron Man isn't completely immune from probability control because the limitation on the personal cloaking device is when it's not your turn. And this is one of the common things that people forget about stealth. When it isn't your turn, or when it is your turn, stealth or this power don't work. So they can prob you all day, every day, right? But if it's their turn, then that's when probability control and whatnot becomes an issue. So once you've gotten through all of that, you've got to eat. So again, countering this team, base them, punch them, hit them as hard as you can, keep them in there. They both have sidestep, which means they do get a free action attempt to break away, and then of course you're at distance. So you kind of want possibly the idea of having some sidestep handy. Poison, Despotellus will be a nightmare for it too because these guys try to run away. Okay, you've got a nasty case of Despotellus anyway. And Despotellus has a really high defense that both of these characters really going to have a bit of a hard time dealing with. So it's a two-way street. This is a really hard team to see. Very, very rough very rough and tumble if it gets based. So think about that when you guys are playing against something that you can't see. Understand that if you think your team is 100% based on range and line of fire, then it's time to step out of your comfort zone and base the opponent because they're going to be a problem if you don't. That's strategy. Where do the figures go? I can't draw a line of fire to them. So, that was Pierre McDermott's team from Majestix. Congratulations on your second place finish. Majestix is a very competitive place to play. Yes. They're also a sponsor. Yes. So they get a little plug.
I should wear my Majestic shit today.
I think they'll be happy with the plug. And I do plan on being there for the regional, assuming I can get the money together. Hey, that Patreon is there. Of course, this show, and now that we're mentioning Patreon, is brought to you in part by our patrons. Want to thank all of those who have been supporting us thus far. You've been wonderful, and your input and your finances have been helping us develop the show a lot better. And we hope to get further along and better as we go. As well, I am planning on getting better at editing this particular show.
Adobe agrees with us.
I'm new to Adobe, so I apologize for the first episode of this. I didn't manage my time very well and had to rush it out. So, Amber's teaching me still, and, I'm kind of demanding when I need to be taught. That's it, guys. Have a good night, and this was The Breakdown! That was actually pretty good. I like that.